When we step outside, we enter into a world that is full of wonder. Some sights and sounds may be familiar, while others might be new. Often, people are so overwhelmed by the magnificence of a pine forest that they forget trees sprout from a tiny seed. Conversely, one can find themselves in an environment they see every day and forget the hidden treasures that lie within. Today's video will focus on centering yourself once you venture into the great outdoors and begin the process of inquiry in nature. The first step is to slow down and allow yourself the time and space to use your senses and make some observations. So you're outside marveling at the splendor that is your backyard, neighborhood, or maybe even your local park. You might be asking yourself, how can I find an interesting phenomenon in something so ordinary? At this moment, slow down and engage your senses.
Upon coming out of my home, I initially observed the weather. It was a cloudy and fresh morning. Then I looked at the plants that were growing to the right of my walk-in. A very noticeable one was this bush that seemed to be flowering. The stems of the flowers were so long that they were starting to curve downward. After I was done observing these flowers, I glanced at a tree in my lawn that had a fascinating bark. This bark stuck out to me because it was as if it was shedding layers. As I approached the driveway, I quickly noticed that the ground was covered with yellow string-like clusters of flowers. I observed that the flower clusters, called catkins, fell down from a nearby chestnut tree. This tree had huge dark green leaves and those same string-like flowers attached in groups. As I was observing this tree, I noticed a trail of roots that seemed to have been glued on along the trunk. The roots looked as if they were laid flat and dried out. The way the roots were ingrained on the tree reminded me of train tracks. As I was walking through the neighborhood, I observed an ivy plant that was wrapped around a telephone pole. The ivy plant had a similar root structure to the dried remnants on the chestnut tree. Some roots were drier than others, some were attached to the pole, and others weren't.
Frankie first observed the weather and his overall surroundings. Eventually, what stood out to him the most was a big chestnut tree by his driveway. Notice that he made multiple observations about the tree. First, he noticed the interesting flowers coming off the tree. Then he noticed the tree had remnants of another plant growing around it. Because Frankie slowed down and made thoughtful observations, he was able to make a connection between a phenomenon in his yard and one in his neighborhood. Maybe you have access to a more rugged landscape during shelter in place. Now, focusing your attention on a single pattern may be an obstacle. When I have trouble concentrating, I sometimes close my eyes to focus on my hearing, touch a surface that has a unique feature, or use equipment to change my perspective. When I first got to the meadow, I noticed a clear transition between the open space and the forest's edge. The feature most notable to me was the difference in plants. It seemed like trees closer to the forest were taller with more lichen on them. I also took note that the meadow contained a more diverse collection of grasses and wildflowers. Two plants that were common amongst both the forest edge and the open meadow were a bushy type plant called coyote brush and a pine I identified to be Douglas fir. I wonder why they both grow well in these two separate areas. After broadly investigating each of our areas, both Frankie and I had a lot of questions about some mysteries we noticed. You may have also had this experience when venturing outside. This video focused on making observations. As you can tell, there's a lot going on out there. How can you focus in and really explore one particular aspect of what you notice? What was something you observed that you still don't understand? What's still a mystery to you? Our second video follows us through the next step of our inquiry process: close observation and asking questions. See you out there!